Hi everyone, Jeff from Oakbound Studio here, and we're going to be looking at the third book in the Factious Waste series, the third and final book in the core set, which is the campaigns section. And this, of course, is what we're all waiting for. How do we turn the mechanisms of this tabletop game and the cast of characters that we've created in our posses into a tabletop action movie? And we do that using the narrative arc system in this book. So, a narrative arc can consist of 3 games, 5 games, 7 games, or as many games as you like. If we're thinking about playing this in a campaign over weeks, a 3-game narrative arc is enough for an evening's gaming. A 5-game narrative arc will be a day, and a 7-game narrative arc is enough to last you a weekend, and you can string as many of those together as you like in your campaign. Okay, it doesn't end at the end of a narrative arc. That's just when we move on to the next episode, the next film in the series, the next installment, however you want to think about it. The narrative arc is playing through one particular plot to its finale and then moving on to the next one. And these give suggested structures for scenarios to use to build that plot line, and we've got a lot of scenarios in this book. So there are establishing scenarios. These are scenarios that kind of set up the main characters, their intentions and the plot going forwards. Complication scenarios, which introduce difficulties for the warbands involved. Climax scenarios, which are about the climactic scenes, you know, the battles or the grand heists or whatever the focus of your narrative arc is. Fallout scenarios, which are when bad stuff happens because of what's happened beforehand, and catastrophe scenarios, when everything has gone to and characters just have to get out of the situation, or they just have to carry on living as best they can. Okay, and the recommended structures are: a 3-scenario arc goes establish, complication, climax. A 5-scenario arc goes establish, complication, climax, fallout, catastrophe, and a 7-scenario arc goes establish, complication, climax, fallout, catastrophe, complication, climax. So these are structures that I used in writing books, plays, films, to build a storyline up, but you can completely throw that out the window and you can use whatever scenarios in here you think best reflect where the action is going next. But what this does allow is for the scenarios to be very, very diverse. So you've got, let me give an example of an establishing scenario. New Kid on the Block is the first one in here. This is about a new gang turning up and trying to assert their superiority over the gang who's already there. A complication scenario might be something like search party, so they're going looking for a particular thing. A climax scenario might be Great Escape. Here's an example. So it's about breaking out of a situation where you're contained or you're restricted in some way, trying to get out of there. Fallout scenarios. Gold Fever is one. If the gang has accumulated a large amount of scrap, waste, treasure, whatever you're using in your games, that takes a hold on members of the posse, and some of them start to act in ways that throw the integrity of the gang into disarray. Catastrophe scenarios, these are everything has gone wrong scenarios. So for example, Nature's Wrath is the first one of these. It's the apocalypse is happening again because we've already had apocalypse, clearly, but something apocalyptic is happening. The nature is rising up, and you've got earthquakes and storms, and the gangs are just trying to last out until the next lull for them to move on to the next space. So you can place these scenarios. There are lots more scenarios in here. So you can build up your narrative arc out of those scenarios. It recommends at the beginning of your narrative arc you suggest some protagonists. These are the main characters in the story arc. It's usually one player's posse, and then a particular antagonist, which could be all of the other players' posses, or one particular rival posse, and a main objective that one character or one posse is trying to achieve. Either the protagonists are trying to achieve and everyone else is trying to prevent them, or the antagonists are trying to achieve and everyone else is trying to prevent them. That just helps clarify what's going to go into building that narrative arc. And what I plan to do in the future is have a look at some classic movies and say, okay, here are the protagonists, here are the antagonists, here's the aim. It's if I was playing this as a three-part narrative arc, it would look like this, and these are the scenarios that I would use. If I was playing it as a 5-scenario arc, these are what I'd use. If I was playing it as a 7-scenario arc, these are what I would use. Here's where I might go on for later. So I'm planning on doing that. So if you're struggling to sort of see how you would break a film narrative down into scenarios, some help will be at hand. But really, once you get into it, writing your own movies on the tabletop, writing your own narrative arcs is every bit as interesting as trying to reverse engineer one that already exists. And in between those games, lots of stuff happens. It's not all about playing games on the tabletop, because in between games, all of your models will have a chance to advance in some way, do something. They can perform one activity, which might be based on the skills that they've got. It might be based on where they are spending that time between two games. It might be that they're doing some personal training. And the way that works is that games give you experience points, and then you have a pivot in between. And a pivot in story terms, this is where things kind of wrap up and then head off in a different direction. So that's why they're called pivots and pivot activities. And you nominate where your warband are spending that pivot, what location they're spending it at. There are different outworld locations. You could spend it in a gen city, you could spend it in an artisan collective encampment, you can spend it in the wasteland, you could spend it in a neo-primitive settlement. There's lots of different places that you can spend that pivot, and generally that will be related to the game you've just played or the game that you're going to play within the whole narrative arc. And you can buy stuff. Different stuff is available at each of these locations, and it's also available in 3 different currencies. So there's this kind of sub game to be played in bartering and trading different currencies in different sites to up your levels of income, so that you can buy the more expensive things. You can take out contracts on collecting waste, or on taking trophy heads and things that give you income. You can take on jobs. Each of these locations, so for example, here's a psych center location. It's better to send refract characters to a site center, for example, because you can trade your XP for money here. You can visit the market. You can turn your opponent's models against each other. You can recruit. You can make money by taking on jobs if your faction is recognized by the location that you're at. But sometimes if you go to a location, you might be a faction that's so-called out of place there. So for example, Gen Core characters are not welcome at psych centers, so they are limited on what activities they can perform there. So in each location, you will get bonuses for being a faction that's excuse me. So in each location you'll get a benefit for being a faction that is welcomed there, or a penalty for being a faction that isn't welcome there, and then you can do your things. You can also take and hold territories. So if you take turf and hold turf, that means that you can always use those location activities, but you can take turf off people as a result of games. You can make a turf grab and steal territories from players. You can also take captives and use them however you like, as bartering tools, or as extra leverage in location activities, or you can exchange them or for other captives, or you can just do away with them if you like. And if you're particularly nasty and you have a threadhead in your group, you can do away with your captives and turn them into leather armour. Tasty. So that's another thing that you can do. There's also a section in this book on regional campaigning. So this is where you draw up a map and you use those regions to move around, and it introduces extra stages in the campaign turn of warbands moving and interacting on the map before any games happen. You can use those two together, so you can run your narrative arc in collaboration with a regional map, or you can run a regional map campaign and not bother about the narrative arcs, or you can mix them in together and do both of them. So it's really up to you how you want to use them. These are tools, but they are tools for creating quite an engrossive, immersive world and campaign. So check it out. Next week we're going to be looking at vehicles. I know you're all excited to know how we do Mad Max car chases in Factious Waste. Well, next week I will tell you.